Hi, I'm Anupa and welcome back to Roots to Resilience. This podcast is all about nurturing the mind, body and soul, building a foundation for strength, growth and well-being. In episode 1, we explored the power of letting go and touched on the beliefs we carry with us. Since that episode, I've had so many meaningful conversations with people who resonated with the discussion. And there seems to be a real appetite for diving deeper into how these beliefs shape us and exploring practical ways to release them. That's exactly what we're doing today, building on episode 1 and going further into deconstructing old beliefs. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this episode, it discusses topics around motherhood, which might be quite sensitive for some listeners, particularly those who are on their journey to being mothers or are facing challenges in this area. And my intention is not to take that away from the depth of these emotions, but to offer a perspective that may spark thought and provide support. So please do take care of yourself while listening to this episode. So let's dive in. As I said in our last episode, we touched on the power of letting go and reflected on the beliefs and stories we'd carried with us through the years. And since then, like I said, I've had so many conversations with people who've shared how much those old beliefs still weigh them down and are still restricting them. And one of the beliefs that I think we grapple with, and I think women can particularly relate to this, is the pressure around motherhood. There's this constant narrative about time and age and reaching a goal before the opportunity is lost. But the kind of thing that I want people to think about today is, what if we challenged that belief, and what if we reframed it entirely? And today we're going to peel back the layers even further, and we're going to explore what beliefs are, where they come from, and how to release them to create space for something new. Part of the reason why I've chosen this topic today is because it's something that has been evolving in my mind over the years. For example, when I was 25, I was absolutely certain that by that age I would be married and I would have children. And clearly, this was a belief or a story that was told to me and which was handed down by family and culture and society. And, I really believed this. I really believed that that was how my life was going to go. And I'm now 38 and I've gotten to an age where, I could put pressure on my relationship, or I could put pressure on myself to quickly have a child and bear a child because, time is running out for me. Us women, we have a biological clock, and I know that a lot of girls will resonate with me when I'm talking about this. We're in such a rush to get things done. We're in such a rush to find a partner. We're in such a rush to get married. We're in such a rush to have a baby, and it's just all rush, 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 rush. And, I just want to say that, while some beliefs really empower us, others create unnecessary pressures or feelings of inadequacy. And it came to a point where this pressure that I was putting on my relationships and myself to quickly, have a good relationship that I could, where I could create a family. It was becoming a bit of a prison for me, and I've now sort of freed myself from that way of thinking. What if we expanded our view of motherhood? What if motherhood was about nurturing and creating in ways that align with who we are rather than following a societal script? So, for example, for me, this now means that I really do believe this, that I am a mother by nature. And for me, I believe that I do not have to bear a child to be a mum. I could adopt. There's so many options out there. I could adopt, I could foster, I could be a great aunt. And I've kind of gotten to a stage where I'm really accepting and at peace with that, because I don't want to force or control anything that isn't for me. And, we have to be really open-minded about what kind of life we might lead and be accepting of where life might take us. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation today, because I think if I compare myself to the way I used to think before, I'm such a different person now. It's so different to how I used to think. And it's really allowed my relationship with my partner to flourish, because there is no timeline, there is no pressure. And I think it's really helped us to blossom as a couple too. That doesn't mean in the future we won't decide to have children. I'm just saying right now it's not something that we're working towards, because right now we're happy where we are. But I know for many, many people, there's this kind of pressure that we must get married and we must have children before this time is lost. And I just want to offer a different perspective and just have an honest conversation around this, because also I've noticed that when I have conversations with people and I say that there's a possibility that I might never have children, there is sort of a little bit of a shock on people's faces. I think it's a bit more unusual for a woman to say that I will not have children, because it's just expected. I mean, women who say that I'm going to have a baby one day, they don't get this reaction. So it's also this expectation that's been put upon us that, we will one day bear children. But what if we challenged that? What if we changed our minds? What if we decided that we have accepted that this might not be for us in our lives? I think it's a really complex thing to be discussing, and I was quite nervous about putting this out on my podcast, but because I'm pretty sure it's going to trigger quite a few people, and some people might turn off. But this is a belief that we hold, that we must at some point have children. And I'm just saying that actually it's your life. Maybe you won't have children, and even if you do have children, it might not be in the way that you think. So I just kind of want to have this conversation. And just to sort of support my view and what I'm discussing right now, I wanted to share an insight from Dr. Shafali. She has a book called A Radical Awakening. And in it, she said, women have been conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to their ability to bear children or fulfill specific societal roles. This belief traps them in a cycle of self-sacrifice and unworthiness. To awaken is to dismantle these false narratives and reclaim our power, realizing our value is intrinsic, not tied to external roles or achievements. Now, this quote, it really emphasizes the need to free ourselves from societal expectations. And this particular quote is surrounding motherhood and womanhood. I think that Dr. Shafali's quote is really interesting, and it basically links these beliefs and expectations to unworthiness, and it opens up a whole conversation around worth and the roles that women play, and how that's tied to our worthiness. And Brené Brown talks about this a lot. She says unworthiness is often at the core of limiting beliefs. When we embrace the idea that we are enough as we are, we unlock the courage to live authentically and step into our full potential. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation today, because what beliefs are we holding on to and expectations are we holding on to of ourselves, which are then in return making us feel unworthy. And then also the other thing that it's doing is basically taking us away from the present moment, because every moment you're thinking about what you're not and what you should be doing and what kind of life you should be creating. But your life is beautiful as it is, and if we just stepped away from those expectations and pressures and released ourselves and freed ourselves from that kind of prison, we would see that life is beautiful as it is, and we never take that moment to see how beautiful it actually is. So yeah, this is quite a big thing for me to discuss right now, and I think it's really, really important. One of the greatest challenges of clinging on to old beliefs is that it can push us into making decisions out of fear rather than genuine desire. I mean, again, this might be quite triggering for a lot of people, but it has to be said. This example of, if we consider the pressure that some people feel to have a baby simply because time is running out, is this really a solid foundation for raising a child? Or is it better to wait until the choice aligns naturally with yourself, your circumstances, your heart? And do people really think about this when they are thinking about bearing a child? It's just, something that we really should be thinking about. And if I can just reference Vishen Lakiani, he describes societal norms as rules, which is bullshit rules. It's what he calls as rules. He says that unconsciously we follow because this is what's been handed down to us. But these rules often dictate who we're supposed to be and what our lives should look like. By identifying and letting go of these rules, we create freedom to live according to our true values. So I'm just, time and time again, I'm just trying to reiterate in different ways exactly what I mean by old beliefs, limiting beliefs, how they shape us, how they force us to live a life that is basically full of expectation and pressures rather than according to our true values. And if we changed our perspective and reframed, we'd feel so much freer. And if I can just talk about reframing a little bit more, reframing is, it allows us to step back from situations and ask better questions for ourselves. So things like, what do you genuinely want, and what does success, love, or happiness look like for you? And being free of those external expectations. So by doing this, we can transform our old beliefs into powerful new perspectives that serve our growth. And I think this is something that is really, really difficult to do because these messages are constantly around us, especially now because we've got social media. You're just seeing things on social media, you're getting all these messages again and again. You meet friends, they might have the same sort of views. You might see your family, again they're asking you, have you got a boyfriend yet? When are you going to get a boyfriend? When are you going to have a baby? So it's a really difficult thing to do, to shift your perspective, because sometimes it can feel quite lonely and you could feel like you're the only one that has this perspective. And this is why I'm having these conversations, because it definitely isn't. There are people out there that do think differently, and that's okay. Something that I really want to try and introduce here is, rather than following these pressures or having these expectations of ourselves, I think we really should practice gratitude, because it's been life changing for me. We should be grateful for the things that we do have rather than comparing and constantly beating ourselves up that we should be at this age, we should be doing this, or we should have this, we should have achieved this by now. We really shouldn't do that to ourselves. And there's this really powerful book by David Hawkins. It's called Power versus Force. It's a really complex book. He's got another one called Letting Go, which is probably a little bit easier for beginners to read. But in Power versus Force, he mentions that many of us enslave ourselves by demanding that our lives, relationships, and successes look a certain way. It's as if we build a prison with our own expectations, locking ourselves into constant cycle of striving and exhaustion. Gratitude is a key tool in shifting from force to empowerment. When we focus on what we already have, our relationships, our abilities, and our growth, we create a foundation for transformation. And Hawkins emphasizes that forcing outcomes, it only creates resistance, but gratitude, it unlocks our natural power. I think this is really, really powerful to understand. And if we could practice gratitude and let go of that force, which is creating resistance, making us drained in our day to day and exhausting us, we would find that actually things would flow a lot more naturally and life would seem a bit more easier. So there's a natural power in just being grateful and just flowing with life. It's like a river. You got to flow with that river. The river doesn't say, oh, actually, do you know what? I'm going to go against the flow. It never does that. And that's how we're supposed to be in life. And I know that I've used the example of motherhood today in my podcast, but these topics that I've been discussing in this podcast, it goes with anything. It really does. And I mean, I kind of touched upon it earlier that I know friends that do this with relationships. There's so much force in being in a relationship, and ultimately it leads to making really wrong decisions. We should just be happy with who we are and grateful with what we have, and then you just find that somebody just shows up because you're the version that is aligning with somebody perfectly. And this isn't just with relationships either. This is with work situations, with family, with friendships. All of the stuff that I'm discussing today can be applied to any area of your life. Where are you applying force rather than, your natural power? So I've discussed a few ways that you could break free from limiting beliefs or old beliefs. I've discussed things like reframing your perspective and practicing gratitude. And I should say actually practicing gratitude daily, which would help you to kind of make this transformation. But I think, the key thing is that first we really need to have awareness. We really need to be aware of the stories that we're internalizing. Ask yourself these questions like, what beliefs have I inherited about success or relationships or identity? And are these beliefs, are they helping you to fulfill your life, or are they holding you back? Are they rooted in a sense of unworthiness or self-doubt? Sometimes we have patterns of, making ourselves feel unworthy. If you have a belief that is making you feel unworthy, is it even serving you anymore? Should you just let go of it? And another thing that I think we never do this, we always have something that comes up in our mind and we really believe it. But do you ever question the source of where that belief came from? Was it from family? Was it from the media? Was it from societal expectations? Where did this belief come from? And is it reinforced by past experiences or moments where you doubted your worth? Just because it happened in the past, it doesn't mean that the same thing's going to happen time and time again. You could have a bad relationship and then have that experience and learn from it and have the most beautiful relationship to come from it. We have to let go of the idea that this experience happened in the past and therefore this serves as a template for, all my experiences in the future. So really question where these beliefs have come from, and is it a reliable source? Did it come from like Facebook or an Instagram story? Really question the source, because we're fed a lot of information nowadays and we shouldn't really be believing everything we hear or see. And then, like I said earlier about reframing the beliefs, if we replace our limiting beliefs with empowering ones, so for example, instead of thinking, I must achieve success by a certain age, why not try saying, I am creating my own version of success step by step, or replace I'm not good enough with I am capable and deserving of the life I want to create. Can you imagine if we allowed ourselves to shift and reframe in that way, how liberating that would be, and then how we would present ourselves in the world and how we would show up in the world? There's so much weight that we're carrying. Let's free ourselves and let's lighten it up. Life doesn't have to be that serious. It really doesn't. If we don't shift, if we don't shift and free ourselves from these old and limiting beliefs, the biggest problem is that you will be closing the doors to opportunities. So have a think about, like, what is the one thing you've stopped yourself from pursuing because you felt you weren't deserving enough? Or, how might you reframe that belief to open new doors? Every time you shed a belief, you're basically opening yourself to new opportunities. You're opening yourself to new people. You're creating space, and we all need to do this. We all need to create that space, because once you start shedding those beliefs, once you start freeing yourself up, some amazing things, miracles happen, some amazing things in your life happen. You will come across new opportunities. This week, I really want to encourage everyone to take these reflections a step further and start taking action. And like, here are a few ideas to get you to start doing this. I think you should really start talking to people about this. Like, have conversations with people, share a belief, and have question it with somebody that you trust. You might find that they actually think in the same way as you. I think sometimes we're so afraid of sharing our thoughts and having these conversations, and then we realize that, my God, everybody thinks in this way, and I thought that I was the only one. Believe me, you're not alone. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, the episode 1 of Roots to Resilience, where I was talking about reflecting on the past year, it really opened up so many conversations, so many meaningful conversations. And with people, sometimes with people that I never thought would relate or resonate. And it's really allowed me to connect with so many other people. And I think for those people, the feedback that I've had, they've basically said to me, this space is needed. Your perspective is needed. We need to have these conversations. So, talk to somebody. You might actually be changing their life whilst changing your own. The other thing, this is something that I don't probably do enough. When you're aware that you have a belief, write it down and release it. Write it down and say you're ready to move past it. Get it out on paper. Sometimes once we've written it down, it's out of our head, and on paper we can screw that paper up and we can put it in the bin, and it's gone. Sometimes we just need to get it out of our head. So why not create a letting go ritual by writing it down and releasing a belief when you're 100% ready to let it go? And another thing that you should do is something that I spoke about earlier: experiment with a new perspective. When you do have an old belief and you realize that you have an old belief coming up, why not try something different to challenge that belief? Why not replace it with something else? Let's question it. Let's, replace it with something else, reframe it. And of course, reflection is still powerful. Having that awareness is still so powerful. It's usually the first step to making a change. So if you're aware of these beliefs already before even listening to my podcast, then that's already an amazing achievement. Ask yourself these questions, like, what belief am I ready to release this week, and what new stories can I tell myself that align with the person I want to become? As we come to the end of the podcast, I just want to say that deconstructing old beliefs, it can be quite scary, because, this is what you've known all your life. It's become your identity. You're so familiar with it. A lot of us don't want to shed our old beliefs. We'd rather, keep suffering with the same old shackles and stay in that prison that we've created for ourselves, rather than be free. And that's the truth of it. It is the truth of it. And this isn't just you and I. This is most of us. It takes a lot of work to deconstruct old beliefs, but it isn't about losing yourself. I know it can be quite scary, because this is what you've known all your life. It isn't about losing yourself. It's about rediscovering the real you beyond the stories you've inherited. And this can feel, I actually don't even have a description for it, because Once you start letting go of the old beliefs and you have that moment of, I do feel a bit lost, like, who am I? Once you start to realize who you are, it can feel absolutely amazing, because you're you're just you're just free. You're free and you're liberated from it. And here's the truth: letting go of what no longer serves you, it isn't a weakness, it is your power. Just like David Hawkins said in his Power versus Force. So I hope that I've offered a bit of a different perspective for people today, and I hope that I've shared some of my thoughts that can help you to feel a bit more freer, to live a more liberating life, and, just to kind of shift away from living a life that's full of pressure and full of expectations and is draining you. Please do like, comment, share, follow, offer your perspective too, because I'm really keen on hearing what you all have to say about these topics, because I think that there's probably not enough of these conversations that are being had, and this is what Roots to Resilience is all about. It's about sharing perspective, it's about having these conversations, it's about being open and honest. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for your support. And I am absolutely blown away with how many of you listened to episode 1, and how many of you fed back, and how many of you said that it was a life-changing discussion for you, and I really appreciate that. As always, this podcast is a food for thought. It's based on my experiences and my knowledge and my opinions. I really encourage you to do your own research before acting upon any of the advice shared, and also seek professional advice if there's anything that you wanted to explore further. So until next time, please take care of yourself and each other, and remember, your resilience is your superpower.